Anyone remember Y2K? Were some of you even born before then? Okay, Y2K was the obsession of the end of the world at the turn of the millennium. I remember this when I was 7 and I was in my front yard waiting for the world to blow up and was moderately disappointed when it didn't. I don't know, 7-year-old, I don't know, I'm in therapy now. But interestingly enough, at that same time, when the world was at deep unrest about what is going to happen, the most successful Christian book series of all time launched called The Left Behind. Young Kirk Cameron, here to save the world. It was so popular, even Nick Cage got in on the action. Over 65 million copies sold worldwide. Some sources say almost 80 million. It made New York Times bestseller, USA Today. This guy, Nikolai Carpathia, haunted every elementary school and preteen for decades to come. Left Behind captivated the minds, hearts, and trauma of a generation, and we are still picking up the pieces. If you don't believe me, look at what's going on in the world today, in the Middle East. And listen, we have been tracking on this for a while. What you think to be true about the future shapes how you live in the present. And I would say some interpretations of this passage, I don't know if that was Jesus' intention, not to create fear, but to create hope. I'm worried that fear is the dominating thing. And odds are, listen, the reason why this is such a difficult and divisive passage is some of you in here may actually hold to the theology that was popularized by Left Behind. And you won't agree with a lick of what I'm about to say. And that's okay. Because in the body of Christ, there is room for disagreement, believe it or not. And I simply and humbly, all of us, not whether you hold to that or not, that all of us come into this passage with an open mind and a humility, with a humble orthodoxy, because I do believe there are some really substantial implications for this passage based on what we believe to be true about the future. Okay? We have a lot to cover. I do my best to try and keep these teachings within 20 to 30 minutes. That's not going to happen today. So just track with me. We're going to be maybe 40. All right? We okay? Very good. So I promise you there is payoff. Just stick with me. Let's work through this line by line, starting with verse 1, Mark 13. And so Jesus, he came out of the temple, and one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." So we saw last week that Jesus went toe-to-toe with the religious leaders of his day, and he has given them a scathing condemnation. He's in the final week of his life. He just was in the temple, basically saying to all of the leaders, you have not been shepherding Israel, you've actually been oppressing them. And so I am here to give judgment against you. And this is here, I'm actually leaving the temple. That is a prophetic way to say that God's presence has left the temple. And he's done all this work to communicate that something new is coming, something new is happening, one that doesn't require the old system. He just went through all of this with his disciples, and yet, funny enough, they're still marveling at buildings. Honestly, don't we too in the 21st century? We say a lot that like we're going to church, which means it's a building that we're going to, right? Rather than saying that we are the church. Not much has changed. And listen, to be fair, this was an impressive building. At the time, it was one of the 7 wonders of the world. In Jewish thought, the temple was the place where heaven and earth overlapped. It was the place where God took up residence. It was the Eden-like place at the very beginning of the scriptures where heaven and earth met together. And God, through that system, through temple, the whole point was to invite the nations to come in and see how good God was. But they didn't. In fact, they looked a lot like the nations. They became oppressors themselves. They were exploiting the poor. They were worshiping other gods, not being who God rescued them to be. And so here comes Jesus, the embodiment of God, to be the faithful Israelite, the true partner. And then one day, he would take up residence, not in a building, but in people. But we're jumping ahead. The disciples don't really know any of that, or they haven't really been listening. Verse 2, and Jesus said to them, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." So Jesus is prophesying here about the destruction of the temple, which actually did happen. AD 66 through 70, there's a guy named Titus who invaded the city and burned it to the ground. And this phrase here, not one stone left here upon another. The temple was so filled with injustice. It was a bit of a bank. So it was like a de facto bank where they would smuggle in and hide gold in between the stones. And so I guess that's like the ancient equivalent of money laundering. But once Titus came, he burns the temple down and he lifts the stones. This actually happened to take the gold. So that's like immediately Jesus is saying, yeah, that's going to happen. And it did. Verse 3, and he sat then on the Mount of Olives. So again, he's left the temple and now he's outside the city, sitting on this mountain, looking over the temple. And some of his disciples, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, they asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all of these things are about to be accomplished?" What are these things he's talking about? Well, if we just take context, if we just look at the verse before it, he's talking about the destruction of the temple. So the question that is set up from his guys is, when is that going to happen? And until about verse 32, which we'll get there in a bit, that's what this is about. Okay? This entire passage is not, listen, it is not about the end of the world, but the end of a world. More on that in a minute. Number 2, even if it was, okay, and I don't think it is, it doesn't fit the overall vision of God's plan for the earth. Because if it is about the end of the world, then the earth burns, desolation, but that's not the end of the story. Because the end of Revelation is actually restoration, not desolation. So, we'll get to that in a second. What will this sign be when all of these things take place, i.e. the destruction of the temple? Verse 5, and Jesus began to say to them, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray." So in Jesus' day, there were many so-called messiahs. They would say, "I am the king, here to lead Israel to kind of the new great world order, to push back Rome." And there were so many people at that time that were saying, "I'm the Messiah. I am the Messiah." And when Jesus comes, he has confused everybody because they think, listen, he's supposed to be some violent overthrower, but he's not. He is not at all what they expected the king to actually be. And he says in verse 7, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be earthquakes in various places. There'll be famines, and these are just the beginning of birth pains. So he's saying, like, expect all of this stuff to happen. This is life east of Eden. I like what Ben Witherington says. He says, part of what they, the disciples, must be alert for is all of the apocalyptic fanatics who think that the end is at hand, who point to false prophets, false messiahs, earthly upheavals to prove their point. In other words, this is not a proof text for the apocalypse, which doesn't actually even mean end times, by the way. It just means uncovering. He's saying this is simply the beginning of the birth pangs because the kingdom is already here. So expect earthquakes, expect wars, like the kingdom has come. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. Verse 9, but be on your guard, For they will deliver you over to councils. You will be beaten in synagogues. You'll stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. Matthew adds in his account, and then the end will come. Verse 11, and when they bring you to trial and deliver you over, don't be anxious for what you're about to say. Say whatever's given to you, for it's not you who speak, but the Spirit. Brother will deliver brother over to death, father to his child. Children will rise up against parents, fitting for a child dedication day, and have them put to death. Yikes. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So he's not only warning them about the suffering of the earth, but their own suffering. And if you look at history, over the next 3 centuries after Jesus leaves, millions of Christians died. Millions. And he says everything that happens here does actually happen. Read the book of Acts. They were flogged. They were put before kings. They were hung and out to trial. They were crucified. Brothers turned on brothers, families on family. All of that happened because the Spirit of God broke out and the kingdom came. And depending on what you mean, so some people, when they read the gospel proclaimed to all nations, that is kind of a proof text to say, well, that couldn't have happened because, not everybody's heard the gospel. But the Greek word there for nations or whole world, it just means inhabited area. So in this instance, the whole known world. Paul uses language like this a lot where he says the word of truth, the gospel that's come to you, just as in all the world. He also says that you've heard, which was proclaimed in all creation. Your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world. Is that actually true? Did Paul proclaim it through every single person on earth, or was it the inhabited area he was a part of? Okay, depends on what you mean by whole world. So my whole point here is that everything that Jesus just warned, that happened to those guys in Acts. Okay? Mark is writing to a group of Christians that's being persecuted by the Roman Empire. We've talked about this a lot, that though the scriptures were written for us, they weren't specifically written to us. Meaning, the book of Ephesus was not addressed to 21st century Charlatanes, right? That makes sense? Same with Rome, Corinth, and so on. So this is Mark and Jesus' encouragement that, hey, you're about to go through some immediate persecution right now, and they do. Verse 14. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. So Jesus even knows this is probably over your head. So this is him just saying, like, track with me. So I'll say the same. Track with me here. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So this phrase, abomination of desolation. This is a direct reference out of Daniel 9. So this is a prophecy about a Greek king, Antiochus Epiphanes, who comes in the 2nd century and destroys the temple. This is the story of Hanukkah. He sacrifices a pig on the altar. He takes out the menorah. I mean, it was a devastating time for the Jews. So much so that they have a holiday that they commemorate every single year to remember that God was with them even in that time. So Jesus is bringing their imagination back to that to say, hey, something like that is about to happen again, and you'll know it when you see it. And regardless of what Jesus meant by that, there's a lot of good theories out there. Basically, he's saying when you see that thing happen, get out. Get out. There's a time to stay, and then there's a time to go. I mean, I think a lot about nations now that war is ravaging their home, and they're thinking very real time, do I stay or do I go? This is what Jesus is after. Verse 15, let no one who's on the housetop not go down or enter their house or take anything out. Let no one's in the field turn back to take their clothes. So basically he's saying, don't go back to get your things. Verse 17, and alas for women who are pregnant or those who are nursing infants in those days. Some of you who are pregnant to say it's already hard enough. I can't imagine running for my life without a car, okay? Pray that it doesn't happen in winter either. In winter, the river flooded, and so you couldn't cross the river. There's stories of Romans that killed the Jews because the river flooded and they couldn't get across. So Jesus, he's saying all of this, like, be ready and get out of town. For in those days there'll be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of creation that God created until now and never will be. I mean, you can go back and read these historical kind of documents, but the invasion of Titus was so bad, thousands of people were crucified. Temple burned down, women abused. It was chaos. And this imagery that Jesus is using, it's creation imagery because he's making a point that something as bad as decreation is about to take place. Something as chaotic as it was in the beginning is about to happen, like the flood or Exodus or when the Babylonians came. It is so terrible, and I need you to hear me. Get out. Don't stay and fight, Israel. You're going to want to. You're going to want to rise up and try and push out the Romans, but don't stay and fight. And many who did died. That happened. And Jesus is saying, look, I'm not on your side. In fact, I am standing in judgment against your oppression. You might think that you go to war, you're doing it in my name, but you're not. And I'm not. So leave. Verse 20. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being would have been saved. For the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. So that word elect is a technical term it's a very Jewish way to say that, of saying Israel. Because again, Israel was picked out of the nations in Exodus to partner with God. And later, the New Testament writers pick up on that same word to describe the church, those that are in the faith of Jesus. And he's saying if God didn't do something at that time, it was devastating. And if anyone says to you, verse 21, look, here's the Christ. Look, there he is. Don't believe it. False Christs and prophets will arise, and they'll do many signs and wonders to lead you astray, and if possible, the elect. But be on your guard. I've told you all these things. So again, he's rehashing, don't get sucked in. This is going to be an increased time of nationalism and to try and push back the Romans, but don't be fooled. Get out. Okay? We alive? We good? If verse 4 through 23 were tough, this next one is a doozy. Okay? This is where like all of the division and factions within the church have come down, starting in verse 24. Essentially, there are three schools of thought in Mark 13. The first one is called the preterist view, and that basically means that everything in Mark 13 that happened back in AD 70. Okay, there's nothing future about it. It all happened back then. My problem with that one is if you go full preterist, you have to somehow reconcile that Jesus has already come back. That is not the historical view of the church. The futurist view is that all of this will happen in the future. Okay, nothing happened back then. The problem with this one too, that I would say, the reason why it's difficult is because the disciples are asking him, when is this stuff with the temple going to happen? Okay, it's an immediate, Jesus is saying, here is how this is going to go down. And the third one that I'm going to speak on here for a little bit is called the already not yet view. Okay, this means that some of it happened, but some of it hasn't happened yet. All right? So, verse 24, but in those days, after that tribulation, okay, again, I argue that tribulation is the destruction of the temple, but very smart people, smarter than me, disagree with me, and that's okay. But there's some split here that think that Jesus is talking about the future of when he comes back. And then there's some that say that no, this is about the destruction of the temple. The reason why I would lean that way is in Matthew, he uses the word immediately. It's hard to say every time that immediately is used is immediately. Something immediately happens. So immediately, it's hard to reconcile that that's some future long distant event. So immediately after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in heaven will be shaken. So this verse here is all over the Old Testament to describe the fall of earthly rulers. Isaiah picks up on this, 13 and 34. Amos picks up on this. Joel, Ezekiel. In fact, in Genesis, Rachel, Jacob, and the brothers are called the sun, moon, and stars. All of that is to describe actual leaders that are falling. So if Jesus is saying like the sun, moon, and stars are about to fall, mapping that same thing of how the Old Testament prophets do it, he is just, again, prophesying Israel's about to fall. And it does. Verse 26, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. So the reason why I wouldn't say that this is Jesus' second coming is the word here that's used is not the word used for second coming, which is parousia. The word is actually ergomenon. I think that's how you say that. So ergomenon. All that basically means is just coming or going. If you read Daniel 7, this is what Jesus is talking about. This is not Jesus coming to judge the earth. This is him being vindicated. This is him being seen as the true king. And what he's saying here is that when Israel falls, when the temple is destroyed and the old system is gone, I will be exonerated because they killed me. And they saw me not as king. But he's saying, when that happens, I will be king. We are almost done, guys. You were doing so great. Verse 28, from the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know summer's near. So also you see these things taking place. You know that he is near. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things that he's just been talking about take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not. A couple weeks ago, Will talked about this fig tree as a representation of fruitless Israel. They looked great on the outside, but they were dead on the inside. And so he's drawing their attention back to that to say, this judgment that I gave on this fig tree, this is about to happen to Israel. And when you see these things take place, he says, this generation will not pass away. 27 times in the New Testament, that word generation is used to describe those currently living, not some like future group of people. So if that's taken very literally, a generation's 40 years. If Jesus died around 30, when does the temple fall? 70 AD. Makes sense? Okay. And then lastly, verse 31. When Jesus says the fall of, or when heaven and earth will pass away, we already talked about this, but the temple was regularly seen as the meeting place of heaven and earth. And though heaven and earth, the temple will fall away, his words will not. Now, verse 32, so I would argue all of that was about destruction of temple. Verse 32, there's a bit of a shift. In the Greek here, concerning that day, this is a new day that's being described. In the scriptures, this is the day of the Lord. This was when Jesus comes back. He says concerning that day, I don't even know when that's coming. No angels, no humans, even the Son does not know when that day, i.e. when he comes back. It's like be guard and keep awake, verse 33, because you don't know when it's coming. It's like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. So stay awake, because you don't know when the master of the house is coming. Whether it's evening or midnight, when the rooster crows, or the morning, unless he comes and finds you asleep. Stay awake. So you can actually wake up now. We're done with all of the hard stuff, all right? I know that was laborious. There's a lot of history, theology. I'm really just scratching the surface there. But let's just pause for a second. Deep breath in. Deep into the diaphragm. Breathe out. The question that you have probably been wondering for the past 25 minutes, why the heck does any of this matter? Why does this, any of this history, any of this matter? I don't even know really where I'm at with Jesus. So what is going on? What are you showing me? I think that Christians that I've engaged with, we go one of two ways. There is either an obsession with the end times, or you are reacting so far the other way that you want to have nothing to do with it. You either are eyes glued to the skies, or you just don't think at all about Jesus returning. I would argue that both are not a healthy posture. Because the way prophecy works, okay? Prophecy is three things. It happened, it happens, and it will happen. That is something that happened. That man is pointing to a destruction here of Israel, but this is a modern city. So he's pointing to something that happened back in the day. We got historical facts. But it also happens, right? We have wars all the time. We have political upheaval all the time. We have persecution, injustice, oppression, death, all of it. It happens, right? And it will happen. There is a day that's coming when the Lord will return, and all of this is just a pattern of human history. And I think, again, what we said at the very beginning, what you think about the future, it shapes how you live right now in the present. And immediately, I think about what's happening in the Middle East. Jesus, he just told us that he is the true Israel. Matthew 2, Hosea 11, John 15. He has fulfilled what Israel could not do. And listen, and some of you may disagree with me on this, and that's okay. But if he says in John 2, I am the temple, and in 1 Corinthians, you are the temple, then there's no need for a rebuilt temple. God's promises to Israel have been fulfilled through Christ and extended to the nations. You know what that's called? That's called the church. And it's made up of all nations and tongues and tribes. Revelation 7, the kingdom has come. And listen, this is so dangerous. If you hold to a belief that God is, quote, on their side, and then your vision, your enemy are the, quote unquote, the Muslims, Paul would say you are badly mistaken, because your war is not against flesh and blood. Your war is against the powers that have rebelled against God. And you know who that is? As the rebel spiritual beings. They are at war. Jesus did not die for them. He died for the image bearers, you and me. So whoever you have in mind who enemy is, if it's the Muslims or the Democrats or the Sikhs or the Republicans or white people or people of color or the LGBTQIA community, you are badly mistaken. Because God's enemies are not image bearers. They are the ones that are behind all of the evil. Number 2, if Christianity is an escapist religion, meaning we just kind of get sucked off and float off to heaven when we die, and it doesn't really matter what we do about the earth now, then mission is not about caring for the world and caring for people. It's to get them to say a prayer so that they float off to heaven too. It neglects justice. It neglects caring for the poor. It neglects helping them thrive now, because all I need to do is just get to people to say a prayer so we all go to heaven. And guys, that is not the biblical story. It's about heaven invading earth now. It's about resurrection in the earth and all of it being made new. He is on mission now to get hell out of his good earth and hell out of you. That's right. And lastly, Jesus does not know the day of his second coming, and neither do you. This last part of his discourse, I think he put it there because he knows that we're going to get hung up on trying to predict the end of the world, like Y2K, or in 2012 when that was happening. I see a lot wrong with that because, for one, you end up with an escapist, fearful mentality. Like, I just need to hunker down, survive, and I don't see what I do now as a way to contribute to human flourishing. And guys, I think a lot of us get stuck in conspiracy theories. And we're counting these prophecies to predict the end of the world, and we're stuck in 24-hour news cycles that's killing our souls. But the hope for the future is not fear in the present. It's that there's a king in charge now. And guys, I think the enemy loves when we are so hung up on trying to figure out, when's all this going to happen, because it gets us off the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. And he loves that because that's his end. Of course he's going to distract us with this stuff. Don't waste your life. What you think about the future matters because it has life or death ramifications for the present. So be faithful now. Care for the world, care for people, love God with your everything, and love your neighbor as yourself until he returns to make all of this new. So, Father in heaven, I just pray again, everything that I unpacked, it's a take on the scriptures. I hear that, I recognize that. There's beautiful traditions out there with different thoughts on this passage. There's people way smarter than me with better and different thoughts on this passage. But if anything is just an offering, Father, I pray that you give us eyes to see that Jesus is in charge now. And he said to pray that his kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so, Father, give us faithfulness for the journey, courage to push back evil, to partner with your Spirit even now, to bring heaven on earth and Charlotte as it is in heaven. So come, Holy Spirit, we need you. Bring conviction, bring healing, and bring joy for the task ahead. I pray that in King Jesus' name. Amen.